My apologies for the infrequent timing of these broadcasts, but my work schedule is pretty hectic at the moment, and I'm surviving on my own at the moment because the rest of my family is away on holiday. Anyway, enough excuses. On to today's subject. Now, unusually for this program, I'm mainly focusing this entire broadcast on one single topic. And that is the significance of being an independent state when it comes to the subject of defence. This is a very thorny topic and something which we don't tend to consider very often when we are thinking about the issue of political independence for Scotland and its physical independence as a nation. Most of you already know that there are many military bases located in Scotland, particularly in the Highlands, the West Highlands, and even further north, Lossiemouth and beyond. Now, most of these British military establishments have been located as far away from London as possible for two primary reasons. One is that at the time that they were sited there, it was thought that the most probable direction of attack by what was then a rather belligerent Russian nation, or in those days it would have been the Soviet Union, was likely to come across the North Sea or the North Atlantic and head over Scotland first. Now, this is not accidental. The British state's defence policy is largely planned so that the defensive network protecting the United Kingdom was mostly, but not entirely, located in Scotland. Why? Well, because of the fact that our almost entire nuclear missile fleet is located in one single spot. This is in Faslane, in one of our sea logs. But not only is Faslane a target, but the nearby, I suppose you would call it a settlement of Coulport, is also a huge target, because unlike many other places where missile defences or even aggressive missile systems such as Polaris in the old days and now Trident, which are based on our submarines, usually tend to be scattered, and they tend to keep these things far apart for obvious reasons. They want multiple locations, but not in the UK. In the UK, the defence of the Scottish part of the United Kingdom was divided into two layers, and primarily the first layer was air defence using conventional fighter interceptors based in places like Lossiemouth, which would be scrambled in the event of the spotting, shall we say, of any Russian bombers coming over the horizon from either the North Atlantic or the North Sea. Now, these would be fighters which would rocket up to high altitude and intercept these bombers before they became a threat. However, modern warfare has changed a lot, even in the last 4 years during the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And the tactics used to fight this war, particularly from the Russian side, involve swarms of drones and a mix of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and these huge swarms of largely Iranian-designed kind of cruise missiles, but basically these are great big drones powered by petrol engines that have delta wings. They carry a tremendous amount of explosives. They're very hard to detect because they fly very low and very slow. Unlike most aerial threats, the UK's defence system is set up to intercept. So a drone swarm, or even a large formation of cruise missiles which would hug the sea flying across the North Atlantic, would fly below radar. It would be very difficult for the United Kingdom's radar systems to detect at such a low altitude. And it's entirely possible that such a wave of attacks would go undetected until they passed overhead over the Scottish mainland on their way to these vital nodes, these defence nodes such as Lossiemouth and Faslane. Now, Faslane is obviously the lowest hanging fruit, because unlike a lot of other countries, the United Kingdom chose to put all of its nuclear tipped missiles in submarines in one single location. Not only that, but they've also stockpiled up to 140 warheads in a hollowed out hill in Coulport in order to be able to transfer the active warheads, the ones which are prepared for flight, onto the missiles and then load the missiles into the submarine silos. Now, all of that takes time, and every time a submarine comes into port, it takes several days for it to be replenished with food, perhaps with water and other consumables. and basic other essential, be even diesel fuel for some generators when they're on the surface. And largely the idea of rearming the missiles. Now, the missiles, I don't know how frequently they replace the warheads, but I'm guessing it's not that often. But when it does happen, it means the submarine's got to be in port for quite a long time. And that would mean that another submarine would need to leave port as the first one came in, so that the continuous deterrent was effective, the one submarine always on patrol. It sounds good, but it leaves the UK with this gigantic target painted on Faslane. So, in my own opinion, looking at the defence of Scotland, the main threat comes from things like unconventional unmanned aerial vehicles, such as drones. We're not talking about the type you buy in the shops, incidentally. We're talking about these very slow flying, I think almost call them cruise missiles, but they're travelling much more slowly. But Russia has also got a large number of conventional cruise missiles, which are jet powered, which fly just as low, but perhaps something like 5 times as fast. And these things are really difficult to shoot down for a conventional jet, because most of our jet fighters have to operate at higher altitudes. That's where their aerodynamics and their speed and their weaponry are really coming into their own. That's what they were designed for. But they weren't designed to skim the surface of the sea, chasing after slow-flying drones or low-flying high-speed cruise missiles. So when Scotland becomes independent, and I say when, we need to reevaluate our entire defences posture. And it's not just about Russia, it's about anyone who means us harm at all. Because we are uniquely vulnerable to aerial attacks, not the type that were envisaged back in the 1950s with giant Soviet bombers flying at high altitude and dropping nuclear bombs on us. That just isn't going to happen. The Russians do still have those bombers, and they are 50 or 60 years old and they've been repeatedly modernized. They do still have nuclear bombs they can drop from them. But they also have air-launched cruise missiles, which can contain nuclear weapons, but probably wouldn't. If an aggressive state wanted to intimidate Scotland in the same way that Russia was attempting to do with Poland recently, you may have read the reports yesterday that Poland's airspace was violated 19 times by a Russian drone swarm. Now, it could well be that these drones were decoys. From what I've seen of the wreckage that's been recovered, and 4 of them were shot down, they don't look as if they have payloads. These look like small, slow-moving drone targets, which are used to test the effectiveness of someone else's defence systems. Poland is very well equipped with conventional air defences, such as the Patriot missile system, which is designed to shoot down ballistic missiles, things that are lobbed from a long distance away, which actually arc up through the atmosphere, out into space briefly, and then back down at incredibly high speeds, and are targeted sometimes on multiple targets. They need to be intercepted at the top of their trajectory, the highest point, and that is what cruise missiles are for. That is what, Patriot missiles are for. Cruise missiles, on the other hand, are far more difficult threat to defend against. And Patriot missiles are just too expensive to waste on small, lumbering, low-speed drones, or even potentially large, lumbering, heavily armed drones with huge warheads. You can't really take them out with a Patriot, and these drones cost maybe between $20,000 and $60,000. A Patriot missile's costing several $1,000,000. It's not worth it to fire a Patriot at something like that, because you're just throwing money away. So we need a system which is multi-layered air defence. And in the case of Faslane, let's assume, just for talking's sake, that we retain the submarine base at Faslane, but without nuclear missiles. So we might have submarines which might be nuclear powered. On the other hand, I've postulated the idea of submarines which can recharge underwater from tidal recharging stations below the surface, which would mean that submarines wouldn't need to surface to recharge their batteries. They could continue to patrol endlessly until they ran out of food, at which point they could come back to Faslane and replenish. The interesting thing about that idea is that it still requires a base, and of course we only have one, and that submarine base is in a sea loch surrounded by mountains and steep glens and valleys. This is a difficult area to defend against a low-flying aerial target, particularly a cruise missile, which is going to hug the contours of mountains, and it's going to fly down the valleys and glens. Very difficult to defend against. So you need to set up some kind of low altitude, relatively low speed, close range missile defense system in these mountain passes that make approaches towards that base. And that would be the low level air defense system. It can be a mixture of missile batteries, which can fire short range missiles from mountainsides inwards towards the center of the glens and catch these low flying cruise missiles in a crossfire, or it could be anti-aircraft guns if the targets are drones and moving much more slowly. Either way, the whole idea of having a nuclear deterrent really disappears out the window, because even if you don't have it, the biggest threat you might have to your submarine base is still going to be from the air, because you can easily blockade the entrance to a lock with submarine nets, torpedo nets and other barriers which prevent anybody getting in there and firing a torpedo at anything inside your harbour. And those already exist. Lossiemouth, on the other hand, slightly different story, because that's a fighter base, effectively provide air cover for large areas at higher altitudes. You may still need that, but you would also need to defend that particular area, and specifically those types of bases, from aerial threats such as UAVs, slow-moving drones, and low-flying cruise missiles. And none of the fighter jets that we have are really ideally suited to that. So again, we need a multi-layered system to defend places like Lossiemouth. So our whole defensive posture as a newly independent country would have to change dramatically because of the evidence that the Ukrainian war has provided us about how a potential threat might actually emerge. And it's not going to be all ballistic missiles. Yes, you might still need a few Patriot systems to defend against ballistic missiles lobbed across the vast distances involved in, say, the North Sea, coming straight in vertically from space. You definitely need one or two of them, but you wouldn't need that many, because the number of missile threats that could achieve that distance that are in places like Russia at the moment in their arsenal is limited. These are massive, huge missiles. These are almost the equivalent of something that can lob a person into space, but they don't quite make it that far. So they're pretty big, and there's not that many of them. So what I'm telling you today is that when we become independent, our new defense force, whatever composition it takes, needs to replan our entire defensive network. We also would need many surface vessels, fast, agile, and potentially missile armed as well as gun armed gunboats, effectively, to patrol our near shore, anything within 20 miles of our shore. And even further than that, we would still need one or two destroyers, perhaps just one or two ships that could patrol around 100 miles offshore looking for threats. But again, they need thick air defenses at multiple levels. So all of this would need to be rethought. I can imagine that there would be multiple new contracts, especially for new types of submarines which don't require to be charged up via any conventional system, don't require to surface to recharge their batteries for propulsion, and don't require nuclear power. Because we know that the submarine fleet currently based at Faslane is leaking large quantities of highly radioactive tritium waste into our locks. And that's something that we just can't tolerate as a newly independent state. We would need to develop a new defence relationship with the UK Ministry of Defence, which is based on cooperation, and they're defending the northern part of the island that we both share, England and Scotland, from attacks from the sky. Seaborne attacks would be slightly easier to defend against, so mainly what we're talking about here is an extensive air defense system. So that's going to mean a new kind of air force, and perhaps an aerospace force necessary to combat these intercontinental ballistic missiles. But also we need a navy. We need a navy because we have thousands of kilometers of shoreline to protect, and we need patrol boats out there day and night. We might need more bases as well. Just having two, one at Faslane and one at Rosyth, is not enough. Rosyth is also a major target for any aggressive state to attack from the air because it's uniquely easy to attack. There aren't any air defences that I'm aware of which can shoot down low-flying UAVs or low-flying cruise missiles at the moment. We do have these mid and high-level defensive systems at Lossiemouth, for example, Kinross. So they are there, but there's not enough, and they don't perform at low levels. So all of this would need to be rethought. And when you're planning a new country, which we would be doing, we need to think about this, because we want to protect everybody from any aerial threats at all, and we need to get rid of the nuclear warheads in Coulport because they're a huge risk to the entire lowland part of Scotland, because any attack, a conventional attack with ground penetrating high explosives, could throw, a huge cloud of radioactive dust and gas into the atmosphere, which would then rain out over the rest of Scotland, making a lot of places uninhabitable, even without a nuclear detonation. All of these things need to change. And that is really all I wanted to say today. And I hope you've enjoyed the program so far, and that you'll continue to watch and enjoy the content I'm producing. So if you do, remember, like, subscribe, ring the notification bells, leave a comment. All of these things drive the algorithm and make sure this program is seen by more people than ever before. That's it from Inde-Car today. I hope to see you again shortly. Please ring the notification bell because I know that my program is going to be sporadic. I'll be back again tomorrow morning with Norrie Hunter at 9:30 on Hodma Jacket. So if you've nothing better to do over your cornflakes tomorrow, listen in to that. I'll see you later. Bye for now.